Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Haworth, Stepfamily counselor, and this month's video focuses on mediation for stepfamilies. With me today is Ty Supancic, partner in the Law Collaborative, a Los Angeles-based family law firm. Ty is a mediator, not a litigator, who mediates child support and custody agreements, among other things, and deals a lot with stepfamilies. He's going to share his experiences and insights with us today, and hopefully keep some of us out of family court. So welcome, Ty. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Let's just dig right in. Okay, I understand that law was not your first career. That you had some other things up your sleeve early on. And so will you share those with us?
Sure. Growing up in Los Angeles, I thought I'd be involved in entertainment. I was for years as a videographer, as a photographer, as a film editor, as a talent agent, and eventually as a personal manager. But my father was a family law attorney my whole life. He passed the bar while I was in diapers, and he always set a great example for me of how you can help people in family law, and I joined him.
That is great. I love your background. It's so fun, really. So I understand also that you deal, I think you told me a third of your practice is dealing with modifications to custody and child support agreements. And so you deal a lot with stepfamilies.
I do.
Yeah, can you talk about some of the pitfalls, what to avoid, what to do when you're looking at modifying a child support or child custody agreement?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pitfalls a lot of people fall into is making threats, making empty threats, making it about fairness, making it about this money isn't for you, it's supposed to be for the kid. That's not how child support works. Child support is for the other party. It's not just for the kid. The concept behind child support is the court doesn't want children living like a prince in one house and a pauper in the other. And so the child support is pay for cable, trip to Disneyland, and eating out and all the things that the child enjoys in the other household. And people make threats and say, I'm going to go in and change it. I'm going to take it away. And then they can't back that up, and it takes away the possibility of having a structured negotiation from a place of this is what's in the children's best interest. This is what's reasonable. A lot of people circle the wagons in response to threats. And someone circles the wagons, you're going to have a much harder time getting them to come out and talk.
Yeah, that is
So
so
I encourage people
interesting.
to start with that.
I love what you said about people get their hackles up about, this isn't for you, the ex-spouse. This is for the kids. And they start parsing out what is for the kids and what's not. And that does get in the way, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I have heard from other family law attorneys is that stepmoms interfere a little too much. They sometimes don't stay in their lane when it comes to mediation and just settling cases. So you've probably seen your fair share of, especially contention between the stepchildren's mother and the stepmother. And what suggestions might you have of what behaviors are helpful and what are not so helpful in the mediation process?
It's tough. Well, first of all, a step parent can't be part of the mediation process. It doesn't make any sense. I am often contacted by stepmoms who say, my husband's paying too much support. We need to hire you to see that we can change it. That's okay. But to think that they can be part of the process, that they can apply pressure, it's not going to go well. The other party is not going to respond well. as reasoned and level-headed as the step parent may be, they really aren't going to advance the mediation process. They're only going to confuse it. They're only going to throw up obstacles to reaching a settlement. It's one of those things where you kind of have to step back, accept it's not about you. A therapist gave me a good mantra a while back, and it's not entirely appropriate, but the mantra was, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah, I use that a lot.
Yeah, and yes, it is they are your monkeys. At least a couple of them are your monkeys, and it's your circus because you're married to this person. But you really can't affect change when you weren't in that, you weren't part of that original relationship. The dynamics may be very different. The spouse you married may have grown and changed from who they were when they married their first spouse, and the dynamics of that relationship are unlikely to be improved. And so you kind of have to step back and let it be what it is, and support your spouse and love your spouse, and but to try to be the engine behind it is enormously frustrating. I've had a few cases over the years where it was the spouse that initially reached out to me, or the fiance, because they were dating someone who was still married and hadn't completed their divorce. And they thought, I'm going to hire a lawyer and we're going to get this divorce done. Almost never works out. Almost never. If the person hasn't completed their divorce, or you getting involved is only going to set you up for money, time, and heartache. You kind of have to let them do it.
Yeah, yeah. I met a mediator who said that she has mediated between the warring factions, so between the stepmom and the stepchildren's mom, that she has conducted mediations. Is that something that you also have experienced?
I have not personally done that, because I will not mediate with a person who's not a party to the conflict.
Got it.
I think it's counterproductive. And we end up mediating a lot of those issues anyway. And it's not nice to hear, and it may be hard to accept, but sometimes the agenda of the step parent is not the agenda of their spouse. And sometimes I think that when the spouse says, my ex is being this, my ex is being that, they've got a large role to play in that. And you know, that it's not really about the ex. It's about the spouse not being willing to establish boundaries or maintain boundaries, or
Interesting.
and to think that as a step parent, you can affect change or be the laboring oar in this transaction, I think is just a recipe for heartbreak.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that, Ty. You know, I've been on a bandwagon here to untangle the relationship between the stepchildren's mom and the stepmom. So the bio mom is sometimes shorthand. And I think you alluded to this, that sometimes the contention is fueled by the spouse saying negative things.
Yeah, because they think that's what they think that's what their current spouse needs to hear. And it may not always be true at all. They just think, just like, and kids do this too. Kids say, when I'm over at dad's house, I'm miserable. We don't play. It's no fun. But they're saying that sometimes because they think that's what mom needs to hear, and vice versa. They'll disparage the other parent if they are witnesses to the parents disparaging each other. They'll get on the bandwagon thinking this is part of the dynamic. This is how it works. And so they'll fuel that. And it's horrible for the children. Yeah. I've heard a therapist describe it as emotional incest, to involve children in those kinds of things. But the child just wants to please both their parents. And that sometimes that's an impossible place to be.
Yeah. And do you address this in your mediation at all?
I do. We do have those conversations. Sometimes those conversations are better had in breakout rooms. I do everything by Zoom these days. I figured out during COVID, I had a couple of cases come to me. They said, we have to be in person. It's not going to work on Zoom. I said, okay, we'll wear masks. And 5 or 10 minutes into the session, I realized, oh, their insistence on meeting in person is so they can beat up on each other. They just want that physical energy, and that they want to be able to threaten and bluster, and I'm not going to engage in that. So I do everything on Zoom, strips out all the physical energy, much more productive. We settle things much faster. My partner and I have kept track. Things resolve quicker. Someone will drop a bomb. I had a dad say, I want all the kids' DNA tested. In the past, that would have been the end of an in-person mediation. Someone would have fled into the hallway. Papers would have been gone. This was, let's go to breakout rooms. Let's have a conversation. Boom, boom, boom. We went back. We settled the entire case, despite dad dropping that bomb about genetic testing and not believing any of the kids were his.
Wow.
Which, by the way, too late, Dad. If you hold the kids out as your own, after a certain point, doesn't matter what a DNA test says.
Yeah.
State of California says you're the parent.
Yeah. And what is that? What is that time frame?
It's brief. It's like a year. It's like a year or two. If you hold out child out as your own, and the community thinks you're the dad or the parent, because it goes both ways, and the kid thinks you're the parent because it's unjust to take a parent away from somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't recall what the time is, because it's also generally a horrible idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Because, forever, the fact that you asked for the DNA testing is going to get back to the child, probably.
Yeah.
And the rest of the child's life, you're the parent that asked for DNA testing because you didn't love them enough and didn't want to be their parent, and you were trying to get out.
Oh, it's tragic what we do to our kids, huh?
Yeah.
So I've heard you talk about the stories that people say, how they talk about their divorces, and that you have some suggestions, I believe, for how parents the stories that they should tell their children about the divorce. Will you share that with
Yeah,
us?
absolutely. They say history is written by the victors. Judges say nobody wins when they go to court. I believe that in mediation and in collaborative law, in any consensual process where the parties are making the decisions and the parties are coming up, they're deciding the outcome, they can both win. It's not the kind of winning where you go, woohoo, but it's not the kind of losing that happens in court. And if history is written by the victors and both parties win, they can write a united history. I grew up hearing that my grandfather was a degenerate, bum, no good, deserted the family, drunk. And 35 years later, my grandmother invited us all to her wedding when she was going to remarry this guy who she had been disparaging my whole life. And my father's whole life. My father was 8 when they got divorced. So, but she was telling the story she needed to tell, she thought, not understanding the impact it would have on her kids. Children identify as half of each parent, subconsciously. And if one parent is a degenerate bum, the kid internalizes, I'm part bum, I'm part degenerate, I'm part layabout, I'm part loser, I'm part whatever. And they bring that with them their whole lives. There's been a lot of writing about divorce stories. I don't have people Google that anymore, because you just get a movie starring Scarlett Johansson called Divorce, which is supposed to be a great movie. Haven't seen it because I haven't seen it. So now I tell people to Google marriage eulogy. And the concept is that people can consciously come up with a history of their divorce that they tell to everybody. Older people get more details, younger people get fewer details, but it's the same story. And it's an empowering story. It's a loving story. It's a non-blaming story. It's not your parent was a bum, or your parent was this, or your parent. It was something to the effect of, we were madly in love. Circumstances caused us to grow apart. We will always love each other. We will always love you. You had no impact on this happening. There's nothing you could have done to have prevented the divorce. I don't write these, but there are therapists that have a practice in helping people develop divorce stories that then they tell. But you have to tell it to everyone. Because if you tell your sibling one thing and your parents something else, the grandparents, it's all going to get back to the kids. The kids are going to hear from their cousins what they heard from their parents or what they overheard mom say on the phone to a friend. Kids hear and remember everything.
They do.
If they hear someone say something negative about one of the parents, they internalize it and it'll come back at some point. And if parents, before they tell the kids we're getting divorced, take the time to come up with a empowering story, it can have an enormous positive impact on the outcome. Judith Wallerstein studied children of divorce for decades and came to the conclusion at the end of her career that it wasn't divorce that was bad for kids. It was conflict. It was witnessing parental conflict, which includes step-parent conflict. If you're fighting, if the one parent is fighting with their new spouse over the other parent, that's what hurts kids and grandkids.
Yeah, that's such good advice, such sage advice. Thank you, Ty. So the other bandwagon that I'm on is to make sure that modifications are not done on the fly. They're not verbal, that people really need to get it in writing and deal with it legally. How often do you think people should revisit their custody and support arrangements?
The language I like to use in my mediation and my collaborative law is that the parties agree to revisit the parenting plan annually to determine whether or not what they're currently doing is still in the best interests of the child. At a certain point, my daughter said, "This is ridiculous. I'm not going back and forth 3 times a week. This 2-3-2 thing is nonsense." I think she was like 15. We're like, "Oh yeah, of course." Now, she never really did the week on, week off. We still saw her for dinner. We still saw her all the time. She was back and forth all the, but she felt like she had some control and some say. But I had my eyes closed and I was just doing what we had done. You don't want to rock the boat. And I think I had a pretty great divorce in retrospect. But we weren't revisiting the parenting plan. We weren't talking about what our daughter needed. So I recommend people go back and look at that. And on the subject of modifications, Terrence Trent Lewis recently retired as our supervising judge in LA County. He believed that as many as 90% of the hearings in the Los Angeles family law courthouse were people coming back to try to change something a judge had done before. They didn't like what the judge had done.
Wow.
And they want a second bite at the apple. They want to try to change things. That doesn't happen in mediation and collaborative law. Because the parties reached the agreement, it wasn't imposed on them. It's a much more durable agreement. People are much less likely to need to change it. And when they do need to change it, they've developed the skills during mediation, oftentimes, that they don't need a mediator anymore. They've learned how to talk about it. They've learned how to make requests. They've learned how to make counter proposals without saying no. And they've learned to make those adjustments. But you're right. You said they need to be in writing. I got a call, Susan, a year or 2 ago from a guy who had retired and learned now he owes $400,000 in change in back child support. And he insists that 40 years ago, he and his ex agreed to a modification and he paid everything they agreed to, but they never changed the court order. And the court says, nope. What your judgment says is the law until you change it. And there was no proof that he had made those payments, and his retirement is ruined now.
I have heard of that a lot, actually, more than I would think. And
people don't want to rock the boat.
They don't want to rock the boat. And the famous last words are, "He would never sue me, she would never sue me." Those are the famous last words.
Yes, and yeah.
Right. We
Yeah.
know what happens. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So I wonder, do you make a distinction between collaboration and compromise? Or
Yeah,
do
I
you,
do.
yeah,
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Because compromise, I heard someone was recently saying, oh, we're both unhappy. That's a compromise.
right.
Oh, neither of us got what we wanted. That's a compromise. My dad used to use the example of a parent who comes into the kitchen and the two kids are fighting over an orange. And the parent says, what's going on? I want the orange. I want the orange. Parent cuts the orange in half, gives one half to each child. Children keep crying. Parent says, what is your problem? You can't do better than half an orange. And one child said, I'm making a recipe. I need the rind. I need all of the rind. I can't make my recipe with half the rind. The parent goes, oh, turns to the other kid. Do you want the rind? No, I want to eat the orange. Do you mind if your sibling gets all the rind? Yeah, if I get all the meat. Okay, great. Neither party compromised. They both got what they wanted. It's not always that easy, obviously, but there are ways to come up with to collaborate outcomes where you're not both losing, getting less than you think you're entitled to. And it requires that people be ready to settle, that they be able to settle, and that they be reasonable in the terms that they're requesting. But there are ways for both parties to come out winners in collaborating on an outcome instead of just compromising.
Yeah, yeah. I like the story that your dad told. I thought you were going to go with the biblical story of cutting the baby in half.
That was part of it also.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm talking to you tell that one.
No, I think everybody knows the baby in half story.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's. You mentioned it's kind of you train people so that they can come back and they know the skills to mediate. When is mediation not appropriate?
When there's no way to do it safely, when there's incidents of domestic violence, and there's no way to protect or shield the party who is the subject, and sometimes it's both parties. I have done very successful mediations where there was domestic violence, but they were obviously done remotely, and both parties were ensconced in second private locations. It's not appropriate when there's unacknowledged substance abuse. If someone is a active alcoholic or drug addict and they're putting the children at risk. I got a case where one of the parents really, really wanted to mediate, and the other parent got a DUI with the kids in the car. No, had an accident with the kids in the car, didn't get the DUI, managed to put off testing long enough that but it was, the other parent was convinced that the other parent was under the influence of some substance. Not appropriate, because you're dealing with the safety of the kids. And I get those cases sometimes where someone says that I don't trust the other party with the other parent, and then they agree to unsupervised joint custody. And I have to ask myself, is this because the parent was exaggerating when they told me they didn't think the kids were safe, or because they're sacrificing the safety of the kids? And that's a difficult conversation to have sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you suss that out? I mean, how do you determine? I know you're all about wanting success for everybody. So how do you determine when a couple is not appropriate for your services?
So in the collaborative law process and in mediation, we can bring in joint neutral experts. I am not a CPA. I am not qualified to advise someone with regards to the tax consequences of taking a retirement account over a house. I know there are tax consequences. I know them generally, but I can't give specific advice about that. When there's questions like that, I refer people to their independent, tax professionals. Sometimes they don't have one. We can bring in a joint neutral expert. Parties give all the information to that joint neutral. That person owes a fiduciary duty to both parties. They render an opinion. Non-binding, but the parties generally go, okay, that sounds good. This person owes us both a duty. Same thing with children's issues. So in a case like that, where I'm not sure that the children really are going to be safe, I will bring in a joint neutral parenting plan coordinator who interviews the parties, interviews the children, and then comes up with a plan for what makes sense. And I have not had a case where the clients terminated the process because they didn't like the outcome. I've had them not like the outcome and understand that if they litigate, it's likely to be a worse outcome because this was an unbiased professional. And if they go to court, their spouse is going to hire someone to, cook the books.
Right.
And it's not likely to go well for them if they go to court. So they sometimes that's the rock bottom someone needs to get out of substance abuse or get out of drinking. I've had several clients, start attending 12-step programs during the process at my prompting. Unfortunately, the non-abusing spouse seldom takes my advice to go to Al-Anon. I think doesn't help everyone, but it's an amazing program for people who are in relationships with people, abusing substances.
Yeah, I want to second that. That's a great suggestion. So you offer a consultation to screen people, if you will, or for them to screen you to determine if it's a good fit. Do you do that for just people in California?
Yes, I'm only licensed in California. The case has to have a nexus in California so we can file in California. I've got clients all over the world.
Yeah.
I had a client where one party was living in Barcelona, the other party was wanting to retire to Spain. We filed the divorce, we served the divorce, they moved to Spain and we finished the divorce. We've got clients where, they're both on the East Coast now. But there has to be I'm only licensed in California. So
Right.
And I'm only familiar with California law.
And so
Yeah.
what would you suggest to those watching this video, listening, who are outside of California? Because there are many of my people in my community who are outside. What would you suggest that if they're interested in mediation?
The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers is a very elite organization. My father, who was a member when he was living, said it was the creme de la creme of family law attorneys. I would go there. I'd search your local location. You can search by zip code on the American Academy of Matrimonial website. I think it's aaml.org. Look for someone who does mediation or collaborative law. If you're interested in, if you can't find someone there, some of those attorneys are only litigators. I would search for collaborative practice groups. Most collaborative lawyers, or not most, but many, many collaborative lawyers are members of practice groups where other lawyers and mental health professionals and financials are members and they have cases together. The biggest challenge to collaborative law has turned out to be lawyers who claim to be collaborative and then talk their clients out of signing the court order that makes the case a collaborative case. We have collaborative law in all 50 states. It's more successful in certain states than others. For instance, in California, very common in Southern California. It's hard to find collaborative lawyers in Northern California, but that's because a lot of lawyers, their business model is going to court and they want to be able to go to court because that's where they make $10,000 to $15,000 a day using litigating. So if you want a collaborative case or a mediated case, find a collaborative practice group. Those lawyers generally know other lawyers that collaborate, and most of them also mediate. If they're, if they're a collaborative lawyer, they generally are also mediators, and so you can mediate with them as well, or ask them for a list of mediators. And
what about? I mean, you're currently overseas, I know. And what about in Europe? Is collaborative law catching on there?
It is. It's in Ireland. It's in Great Britain. I don't know how prevalent it is in the EU. They're also doing it with probate cases. They're doing it now with one of the saddest areas of law is children injured by defective products. When a kid is injured or killed by a stroller or by a defective car seat, most families cannot afford to litigate against a conglomerate, a multinational manufacturer of car seats or toys or whatever. And what ends up happening is the family is completely destroyed by that litigation. The tactic of the lawyers defending the companies is to blame each parent, instill doubt in each parent. Most marriages don't survive those kinds of court cases. It's perfect for a collaborative law model where they can resolve things without the blame, without what happened, what you have to do in court. I mean, it's malpractice to not throw every piece of pasta on the wall in a court case. Your client says, well, hold that one back, and then you lose, and then you shouldn't have listened to the client. So whenever you go to court, the attorney has to throw all the pasta on the wall. It doesn't matter how messy it gets, but that's horrible for families. It's ruinous for families. And in the collaborative law model, you're not throwing the pasta on the wall.
I love that analogy. So anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share about step families and mediation? Any words of wisdom?
I was thinking about this today as I was taking a walk, and I thought about some boilerplate that I have, not really boilerplate, but one of the model terms I have in my parenting plan is about step-parent discipline, disciplining kids. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a children's expert, but the model language that was given to me by therapists with whom I work all the time is that it generally does not work to have a step-parent disciplining children.
Absolutely.
And then I was thinking about my own life and how that might be impossible or impractical at certain points if the child is alone with a step parent and the step parent is completely neuter. That's a very dicey thing. I think there needs to be some ability for the step parent to maybe not 16-year-olds, maybe the horse has left the barn at that point, but littler kids, I think that there has to be some allowance. Otherwise the step parent could become a doormat, and that's not going to benefit the kid or the relationship. So I really don't know. I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
That comes up
a lot more research.
That comes up a lot in my practice, and I recently read some research that said that's the #1 source of contention in step families is discipline. And the way I look at it, that you're kind of like a babysitter, if you will, when you're alone with the child or the children, and that you do have to deal with emergent situations. But you have to say, do this, do that, but then you don't need to follow it up with, and then you're grounded for 3 months. That is the biological parent's job, is to do that. Now, perhaps you were thinking about if it's an extended period of time, like months or weeks, but generally I say, deal with the emergent situation as you would if you were a caretaker for the child, and let the biological parent do the discipline, the penalty, the consequences, whatever you want to call it. And that it doesn't.
But after consulting.
Yes, of course.
I would think that only after consulting with the person who witnessed the behavior.
Absolutely. Well, it would be as if you were the caretaker of the child, and the parent returns, you say, this is what happened. And maybe you'll have a little more input as someone who lives there, as a stepmom. But yes, it doesn't work well. It doesn't land well to have the step parent be the disciplinarian. It backfires very often. There may be some cases where it's warranted, but I haven't seen very many, if any. Yeah. So, Ty, this has been fabulous. We could go on and on, but how should people get in touch with you if they want, people in California, if they want to explore working with you? What's the best way?
Thank you. My website is thelawcollaborative.com. My email address is ty@thelawcollaborative.com. Numbers on the website. We offer a free Zoom orientation for couples who are considering collaborative law or mediation. Like you mentioned or referred to, I give the couple an hour. I explain the whole process. I explain all of their options for dispute resolution in California, walk them through the steps. And at the end of the hour, they generally know whether or not any of those are going to work for them and whether or not I'm the person they want to do it with.
Yeah, that is so generous. Ty, does it need to be the couple, or can you also do a consultation with just one party?
What I've learned, what I've found over the years, that when I give any significant time to one party and not the other, the party that was omitted is not going to agree to mediate with me. So when people call me, and it generally is one person reaching out, I say, listen, if you really want to mediate or collaborate, you and I can't spend any amount of time talking. I can't answer any questions for you. To make up for that, I'll offer you a free hour where you both hear the same questions and get the same answers. And that way you're both on the same page. Well, how much does it cost? If you go back to your spouse and says, this guy charges X, I'm already off the list because now they know that you and I have spent time talking and they're not going to feel like I'm neutral.
Yeah.
So I'll answer all your questions in that free hour. You'll both hear and people generally go, oh, okay, that seems fair. That's fine. And then when they're both there together, I'm neutral and they feel like it's neutral and they're comfortable going forward.
Yeah.
But when people really press, well, I just want to talk to you about my separate property inheritance, or I just have a question about, like, I'm happy to talk to you as a lawyer, but your spouse isn't going to want to mediate with me because they'll know I'm going to tell them that we spoke and they'll know we spoke and I'm no longer neutral now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Ty, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. I learned so much from you, as I always do when we speak. So I appreciate it.
thank you. The work you're doing is amazing. I wish you were around. I wish I knew about you years ago. You're really doing amazing work. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.